This is Barney Gumble. He is Springfield's resident drunk and the primary occupant of Moe's Tavern. And yes, that probably includes Moe himself. Barney is constantly broke, lives in squalor, and is generally not taken seriously, especially by women. However, Barney is a very skilled singer and filmmaker, a successful entrepreneur, and was selected by NASA to go into space. So at the very least, he's more talented than his good friend Homer. Barney's constant struggle with alcohol became a source of shame for him, and he traded his Duff beer for a coffee addiction and helicopter lessons. Eventually, due to Moe's influence, Barney fell off the wagon and went back to being the town drunk. Don't cry for him, he's already dead. This is the history of Barney Gumble. Okay, I'm just gonna say it. Barney Gumble is the most underappreciated character on The Simpsons. I know this because I was part of the problem. When you all overwhelmingly suggested this guy for this video, I was initially puzzled. Like, really? I served up Kirk Van Houten and you picked frickin' Barney? But after doing the research, I am totally ready to eat some crow. Barney Gumble is a fascinating character in terms of how he evolved on the show, and I am genuinely surprised he isn't used more. How did a character go through such a significant continuity change and somehow end up in a worse way than he started? It's just so weird. Let's go all the way back to the beginning and see if we can figure it out. Barney is part of a special club of characters who first appeared in Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire. He kickstarts the whole Mall Santa storyline and then the dog racing scheme. Season 1 Barney was portrayed as Homer's best buddy. However, the dynamic was slightly different back then. In those days, Barney was used to demonstrate how low Homer has fallen. Homer bets on the wrong greyhound, Homer gets beaten up in a fistfight, Barney calls him a bigger slob than himself. When Marge kicks Homer out, he's forced to stay at Barney's disgusting apartment. Homer is always being brought down to Barney's level. As you probably noticed, Barney started out with blonde hair, which frankly looked absolutely terrible on him. This was changed pretty quickly though. By the time the Telltale Head and Homer's Night Out rolled around, he was sporting the hair color we all know today. He also started having less fun. In the first 3 seasons, they leaned really hard on the pathetic drunk angle of Barney's personality. Obviously this is an important part of his characterization, so it made sense they started here. Moe wasn't as abusive to Barney yet, it was more about building up the relationship and demonstrating Barney's obsession and dependence on him. Also, someone needed to laugh at Moe during all of Bart's prank calls. Homer and Barney were still portrayed as best buddies, but now the dynamic is reversed and they'll let Homer rise above Barney's stature. They stopped beating up on Homer so much and instead put Barney at the bottom of the food chain. We still get glimpses of Barney's crappy apartment, but they don't force Homer to live there. At least, not in flashbacks. In addition, Season 2 loves showing off how unsuccessful Barney is with women, how he can't get a date to prom, and how Selma has to settle for going out with him. Barney is portrayed as basically the rock bottom for Selma, someone we should applaud her for walking out on. That being said, the show was kind of obsessed with pairing Barney with Patty and Selma. No, really, this isn't just me trying to make Selma happen again. There really is a strange little runner going on. Like later in Season 2, Barney attends Homer's party, goes right up to Patty and Selma, and starts hitting on them. It doesn't go well. Then in Season 3, he goes up to them and asks if they're Mary Tyler Moore. It doesn't go well. In Season 4, Selma sees him depositing a sample at the sperm bank. That one did go well? Then in Season 5, when everyone's going after that treasure, now they're randomly in a biplane together. The writers basically dropped this character dynamic after this point, but I'm amused by the idea of Barney being this annoyingly omnipresent person in Patty and Selma's world. Like there's this whole dynamic going on that we never really see. You know, kinda like Barney's secret relationship with Mrs. Muntz. Anyway, I would argue the biggest turning point for Barney's characterization came in Season 3's Homer at the Bat. That hilarious Lord Palmerston joke. Here's where they started playing with our expectations of him. Where Barney is still being a belligerent drunk, but a belligerent drunk who is knowledgeable and opinionated about British prime ministers. This is a pretty small moment in a very wacky episode, but is a sort of sneak peek at the golden age of Barney Gumble, seasons 4 through 6. The wackier and more subversive sense of humor of this era really played to Barney's strengths. Barney drunk jokes became less observational and more absurd, where the joke is less, Barney is a loser, and more, how is he still alive? He started delivering more screw the audience and non sequitur kind of jokes. But more importantly, Barney was appearing outside Moe's tavern more frequently. We started seeing him do various jobs, like playing Crunchy the Clown, the governor of old-timey Springfield, and the phone operator for Bart Chat. Or else he'll be in monorail construction, volunteer firefighting, or working for Grandpa or his Uncle Al at the bowling alley. As a side note, the original idea for the series was that Barney would own Barney's Bowl-O-Rama, hence the name. But the writers decided it was unbelievable that he could be a business owner. If you're going to be stuck with this weird name, you may as well have fun with it, right? I think Mr. Plow is a good example of the transformation of Barney during this era. We get a very exaggerated version of his lowest lows, but then they pivot to something new. Seeing Barney actually be successful at running a business, getting a taste of his ruthless side, some backstory with Homer. They never really stuck to this backstory, but just giving him one was a good step. Barney was given several spotlight moments throughout seasons 4 through 6, and they all followed this kind of template. He surprised us by being an amazing singer in Homer's Barbershop Quartet, and then basically transforms into John Lennon. In Deep Space Homer, he gets sober and kicks Homer's ass at the NASA training, only to be undone by non-alcoholic champagne. In A Star Is Burns, he produces the sensitive and captivating short film Pocahontas. It's no football in the groin, but it's still pretty good. Actually, now that I think about it, this is probably my favorite Barney moment in the entire series. I think what this era got right about Barney was how inexplicable he can be. Inexplicable, I think that's the key to a great Barney joke. That, for some reason, he could clean himself up this much, only to fall off the wagon just as easily. That of course he was looking for a project to do with Linda Ronstadt. Or that knocking over a giant bottle of syrup would induce a horrifying flashback. He's a little like the adult Ralph Wiggum, where you can put him in any situation, silly or mundane, and get a totally absurd and nonsensical reaction. He's a total wildcard in every scene. Seasons 7 through 10 were less kind to Barney overall. He retreated back to being mostly a character at Moe's Tavern, and stopped participating in the plot as much. Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein originally pitched Barney as the person who would shoot Mr. Burns, so they could send him to jail and change up the dynamic. I guess that's why they never cleared him in part 2. To be fair, Barney does have some very funny moments during this era, including another great musical moment. It's also worth noting that, despite being Moe's secret admirer, accepting of Homer becoming a woman, enjoying Skinner feeling him up, and happily becoming Otto's wife, now he's all about setting Bart straight. The Barney doth protest too much, methinks. These seasons were less about subverting our expectations of Barney, and more about taking what we know to new extremes. Barney joining the Navy Reserves means he has a new place to fall asleep. His love of beer gives him the courage to rescue them from a fire. Also, he saves Homer and Moe. When Barney is forced to be the designated driver, he somehow manages to do it, but basically loses his mind in the process. Barney is still very comfortably in his stereotype, but they're exploring every nook and cranny of that stereotype. Here's where the history of Barney Gumble gets weird. Dan Castellaneta, who provides Barney's voice, and his wife, Deb LaCusta, came up with a script idea in which Barney sobers up. The idea was originally pitched around seasons 3 or 4, but didn't get reconsidered until season 11. The concept turned into the episode Days of Wine and Dozes. In that episode, Barney feels humiliated when he can't remember his own birthday party, is taunted by Moe, who got him free helicopter lessons, and he vows to sober up and use those lessons. At the end of the episode, Barney saves the day with his helicopter and moves on to an addiction to coffee. For the remainder of the Scully era, season 12, Barney remained sober and would show up drinking coffee, playing tennis, and stuff like that. This was a new status quo for his character, and they stuck to it. However, as early as season 13, when Al Jean took over showrunning duties, we started to see signs of wavering. In Tales of the Public Domain, Barney plays the role of Dionysus, who sinks Atlantis in a drunken stupor. Okay, this is fine. Who else were they going to get for this Greek god in their fantasy? Makes sense. Then, in The Sweetest of Pooh, Homer gives Barney a beer to get in character as Ulysses S. Grant. Somewhat surprisingly, Barney is unaffected by it. However, in the Spelling Bee episode in season 14, Barney relapses and is lying in the middle of the road. But then a few episodes later, he looks totally sober again, like nothing happened. Naturally, the series isn't focusing on Barney's journey or anything during this era. This is still an episodic show. But it's clear that his road to recovery has been a very rocky one. I suppose that's pretty realistic. But honestly, it doesn't come off as the writers wanting to tell a nuanced story about recovery. It feels more like they're second-guessing the status quo change. Look at how nostalgic they are in Mo Baby Blues for classic drunk Barney. By season 15, it was clear that Barney had been going through repeated cycles of sobriety and relapse. In the classic episode, Codependence Day, he refers Marge to his rehab clinic, which cured him 5 times now. This seems to be the end of the storyline, as 2 episodes later, in My Big Fat Geek Wedding, Mo convinced Barney to start drinking again. Man, this episode really destroyed all the developing storylines, huh? They had flip-flopped back and forth on Barney's status, but this feels like the big announcement to the audience that, hey, classic drunk Barney is here to stay. So why didn't sober Barney work? I am personally all for status quo changes and taking characters in new directions, but even I think this was a failed experiment. The problem was that the shift didn't add a new functional use for his character. He learns to fly a helicopter, but how often will the show need someone in that role? There is an excellent usage of the skill in season 16, when he saves his high school girlfriend from a fire. We see it again in season 18. But otherwise, it doesn't bring much to the table. If they had Barney, for example, pursue a law degree and become the Simpsons lawyer, they'd have a lot of reasons to keep him around. Maybe Barney gets sober and actually buys the bowling alley. But this was a situation where they took away his main source of jokes and didn't really replace it with anything, not even a personality change. He reached a sort of dead end. From season 16 onward, it's basically the same kind of drunk jokes we saw in the earlier years. Now, I don't mean to give the entire second half of the series the short shrift, but that's the honest truth. In terms of noteworthy appearances, Barney's story is very front-loaded. But, since I still looked them up, here are some highlights. In season 17, Mo is suicidal and asks Barney to kill him, but instead Barney got him a wool hat. Aww. In season 20, Barney is featured in the new HD opening sequence, greeting us with a burp in almost every episode. In season 22, he pranks Homer using the Duff Blimp message crawl. In season 23, he works briefly as a stripper, showing us his version of Three Hat Monty. In season 25, he is a Gumbamel in their Dr. Seuss parody. In season 27, his singing voice is featured twice, as well as his body in the Borat swimsuit. In Treehouse of Horror 27, he murders Ned Flanders and turns his head into a hood ornament. And in Treehouse of Horror 30, he drives Selma and Kang to their spaceship. That Barney-Selma connection exists even after all these years. I wish I could give you more info on these later seasons, but they're pretty much one-scene appearances every couple episodes. The most he factors into a plot was in season 29's Singin' in the Lanes, where he joins the new incarnation of the Pin Pals, coached by Mo. He's actually a great bowler, and they reach the state finals. He sobers up briefly because he falls in love with Mo's sister, who is actually Mo catfishing him with a picture of Jennifer Lawrence. It also features this really odd joke, where the rich jerks give him this expensive alcohol, They tell him it costs $1,000, and he belches it up. And then he inhales the alcohol vapor and gives a mighty Chewbacca roar? I don't even know what's happening anymore. In terms of his relevancy, Barney got boxed out by characters like Lenny and Carl. They both appear at Moe's Tavern and are friends with Homer, but are also able to show up at the Springfield nuclear power plant. They're able to do stories about Homer working for Carl, for example. When Barney went sober, these bar scenes were often just Homer, Moe, Lenny, and Carl. The show got more used to them being the main crew. I think Homer's gradual loss of dignity also sort of hurt Barney over time, where earlier on, you could often count on Homer holding himself to a higher standard than Barney. But especially in season 10 and later, Homer's alcoholism and willingness to do pathetic things made Barney less useful. Also, we could probably blame Gil for taking some of Barney's odd jobs away from him. When in doubt, blame old Gil. Honestly, it doesn't feel like anyone on the current writing staff is really in Barney's corner anymore. I don't know if there's a general sentiment that he's played out by now or what. It's just, the show cared enough about Barney to give him the status quo change, and then it cared enough about him to change him back when it wasn't working. Like, you can see the effort put in. But then the show sort of just gave up on him. That's why, after doing all this research, I think Barney is the most underappreciated character in the show. He isn't like Otto, where they tried giving him a spotlight episode, it didn't take, and he faded into the background. I like Otto, but I get it. It happens. Barney brought so much to the table in these early years, so many classic jokes. In seasons 4 through 6 especially, he would always rise to the occasion when the plot demanded it. One moment, he'll wow us and blow away our expectations for the town drunk. The next moment, we'll be shaking our heads, wondering how he could sink so low. Barney is so good at hitting those two types of extremes, and I would love to see more. Now that Disney owns The Simpsons, I am totally down for Pocahontas 2. It will be artsy, pretentious, and I will write a 40-minute review about it. Let me know in the comments what you think of Mr. Barney Gumble and your favorite moments of his. He definitely ended up winning me over. I'd be curious to hear if anyone feels similarly. Also, as always, let me know who you want to see next for Simpsons Histories. This time I'm not going to put any suggestions or nominations out there. After such a nice pick for this video, I trust in all your great taste. I know I won't be underestimating the town drunk anytime soon. As always, thanks for watching.